Patel. Monica, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited, and I know about your business. We've talked business before, but I had no idea anything about your birth story. So I'm really excited about this. I want you to jump in and start the story where it makes sense for you.
Okay. Well, I am Dr. Monika Patel. I am an obstetric and orthopedic physical therapist. And, you know, I I think it, I was drawn toward movement science my whole life. I loved being active. I loved working with people. And then about 1 year into being a physical therapist, my boss asked me if I was interested in doing further training in pelvic health. And at that point, I had just finished doing a year-long, like, fellowship in orthopedics, and I was like, "No, I don't wanna just narrow down too soon, sorry." Um, but then she asked me 3 times, and I was like, "Okay, I think that's a God thing." So I listened, and sure enough, she was right, and it was a really, really great fit for me. So for about a year before I became pregnant myself, I was working about 50% with parents and the pelvic health population. So I had this influx of new moms or expecting moms, and wow, just to see the resiliency in that population and to
Mm,
be able to serve and meet a need that's often not addressed, you know. And I didn't. It wasn't until I became pregnant myself that I kind of saw the actual gaps in traditional care in
yeah.
obstetrics. It was just kind of like pee in a cup and okay, you don't have gestational diabetes, good luck. There was no guidance on what movement is safe for the parent. And so, and then I saw so many moms coming into clinic postpartum that hadn't come in while they were pregnant themselves. And they were struggling to heal from pretty intense, tears and prolapses. And I have such a preventative mindset of like, okay, what can we have done to prevent this? And rather than when you're sleep deprived and have a new tiny human, sometimes humans on your hands, and it's hard to find childcare and keep appointments and hold yourself accountable to doing anything, um, even brushing your teeth, how do I expect someone to do 20 minutes of exercises every single day? Um, that I really wanted to be more on the preventative side, which then, like, my own birth experience plus working with all these moms postpartum made me want to start my own train for birth business.
I had no idea it was before and that it worked that way. That's amazing. And I mean,
Mhm.
it's not like you can be an amazing doctor and have never experienced this thing, right? I've had some amazing male doctors, for example. None of them have given birth, not one of them. So when they say to me, like, you're going to feel some pressure, I remember thinking, like, really? How do you know? How do you know what this feels like? You've never
Right.
experienced it. So you can be a really great physician and you have a female body. So you understand the pelvic
Mhm.
floor from a female perspective, but to be working with women and not even realize how many gaps there are in care until you go through it, because it's astounding. We don't ask and we don't think about it, and there's no reason to until we go through it and we realize how alone we kind of are in the world, in our pregnancies, in our infertility, in our miscarriages, in our pregnancies, and in our birth. We're just kind of like, you don't even know what questions to ask,
Right, and
really.
yes, that's what I just being kind of a more of a academic person too, is I struggled with, you know, what questions do I ask? How do there's so much resources out there, but then how do you filter it out? How do you
Mhm,
digest it in a way that, you can that's relevant,
mhm.
Uh, and, I did concurrent care, so I was planning on a home birth, but so I went to a midwife. But just in case, it was my first baby, I also wanted to have a doctor that was familiar with me and my case in case I had to go to the hospital. So I went to a local clinic called Clinica Medicos, that I could go to on the weekends and not have to take time off work. So I would go on Saturdays for every checkup. I did a midwife checkup and a checkup with an OB at Clinica Medicos. And, so that was considered concurrent care,
Mhm.
and, it was just, like, repeated, um, repeated experiences, but it was interesting just to have both like the traditional medicine and the more like the non-traditional of midwife. Um,
How different I don't think I've ever talked to well, I mean, I know someone who's done concurrent care, but it wasn't also the
mhm.
first baby. So, how different and similar I mean, the tests that you take are similar because 'cause I've had both too.
Yes.
Not concurrent, but I've had OB care and I've had midwifery care, and
Mhm.
they're testing for diabetes. They're testing for the same thing. They're measuring your
Right.
belly. What were the differences between the 2?
Yeah. So my OB was male, and he was is a father of, I think he was like 12 kids at the time. So I really trusted his instincts as far as like parenting goes, and he's really great at explaining things. He liked to dive down the um, medical explanation side of things. He was very intentional, very gentle. Um, and then my midwife was essentially, she's like the grandmother of midwives in
Mhm,
our town. She's just iconic. And so to have not only just like different silos of medical models, but also very different personalities was interesting.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and, I think the main difference was that my midwife gave me a lot more resources as far as, hey, what books can I read? She directed me to Ina May Gaskin right away.
right.
And she also had like a manual of like preparing for birth manual that I loved because it was like, okay, here's some herbs that are helpful. Here's some teas that are helpful. Here's how to do a perineal massage. And that was before I'd had the specific obstetric training that I have now. And so that was really kind of my first jumping point into obstetric care, I
Mhm.
felt like.
Okay.
Mhm.
That's because I feel like, in my experience, my OB was more in the event something goes wrong and how the medical community can support you from a medical standpoint, where the midwives were very supportive of the fact that it's natural childbirth and for the
Right.
most part there aren't issues. So one was coming at it from in the event there are issues, we're here and we can do all these things, and the other was coming at it from there usually are not issues, and so this is how it should go in a normal situation most of the time. It was I had great OB and great midwife experience
Mhm.
also.
Yeah.
So I'm not even talking about like I had a horrible hospital or horrible birth experience,
Mhm.
just in good experiences with both ends of the spectrum, they
Yep.
were supportive differently. Like you
Yes.
said, grandma, I felt like surrounded and loved and held like in any way that my birth went with midwives, patient and kind and loving
Mhm.
and eat food and it's okay. Where the doctor was more my OB was more like, and if this happens, this happens. And if this happens, it was like how
Sure.
the medical world can intervene and save you. Neither's bad.
Right, yeah, yeah,
It's bad.
I appreciated both perspectives, and it was kind of funny that I did, almost overdo it with the doctor care and then ended up not using either one.
Yeah,
Um,
okay. So you're pregnant and you're already a doctor, but you're not really working a lot with the perineal care yet when you got pregnant. I'm kind
I
of
I
getting
was about half my caseload was the
okay.
prenatal the
And then
breastfeeding.
it was enlightening when you were the one pregnant.
Yes, mhm,
Very. I think the biggest thing for women is they don't even know what to ask. And then when it's over, they
mhm.
realize some things that they should have asked or could have, but why didn't someone offer that information? Why wasn't there more conversation around things? Like, why are women left to figure out what questions they need to ask, type of thing?
Right, I mean, we're missing the intergenerational wisdom, right? Like, I'd never watched a birth. I didn't really talk to any of my family members about their birth experiences until I was pregnant, you know? Um, so I think just that gap in lived experience going into it, it does make you feel kinda scrambly.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Mhm.
And that's why I think women don't even know what to ask. I remember having a cousin who had a baby and she's like, why didn't anybody tell me what would happen to my hips during pregnancy and childbirth? Like how much your hips spread. And I'm like, Like, would it have stopped you? Would it have made sense to you? Would it have changed anything about it? That's not where I would start in information. But for her, like, she's like, it's down to the most basic things. Like, I didn't realize how much my body was going to change. You don't even think about it, and you don't even know
Yeah.
to ask those questions. And so, but I think you also, with pregnancy, you have a list of like any one of these 100 symptoms or things could happen to you. And we're all going to have 20, but they're not going to be, they're, some of our things may overlap, but we all have a different 20 symptoms or whatever issues out of the list of 100. So it's not the same for lots of us either.
Yeah, yeah, and, a couple thoughts came up with that comment.
Okay.
One actually is it's interesting too, because actually, not only did I not have the intergenerational wisdom, but I grew up in Memphis, like a very urban area. I'd never watched anything give birth, no animal, I'd never watched a chicken hatch from an egg. I was so detached from that process. Um, and so now having a 4-year-old son, like I do have chickens. I want him to see the full circle of life, things being born, things passing away, and I'm very intentional about that, which I think does stem from that kind of lack of knowledge going into birth. And as far as the vast array of symptoms comments goes, I was frustrated, and I am frustrated a lot of times, even just in general, with how women's healthcare, a lot of issues and symptoms are dismissed as, oh, it's hormonal. It's like, what? Okay, yes, hormones do play a factor, but that's not. Just don't dismiss it because of that. And so, I think some of the research I've read correlates the amount of change that happens to a pregnant person's body during and postpartum is equivalent to getting hit, I think, just 5 times in an NFL football game. And so, when that happens, it's like, oh my gosh, let's check everything out. Let's dive in deep. But I think it's just really important to continue to respect the changing body and how much changes do occur, and not necessarily in bad ways either.
No, and it's
Yeah,
not all bad, but it
right,
can feel confusing. Like, I
right.
think that was maybe a good word when you said I'd never even seen a chicken come out of an egg. We're all coming from different places, and like, I loved feeling the baby move in me. I loved
Mhm.
that, right? Until it's so uncomfortable that you're like, "Oh my gosh, stop." But it's still a surprise. It may be a pleasant surprise that your body is able to do this. And some of it can just be confusing if you don't know how much your breasts are going to change. Is there something wrong
Mhm.
with you?
Right,
Your areolas get bigger and darker. That's just one minor change that happens to all of us in pregnancy. But if you didn't know it was going to happen, it would be really confusing or scary, even
yeah,
though it's like, quote, normal. I'm not sure why it's such a mystery still.
right.
um, so you get pregnant and you have concurrent care from an OB and a midwife, and take me
Mhm.
through what happened because you ended up having a free birth.
Yeah, yeah. So, um let's see. I was working full time throughout my whole pregnancy, and at week 39, I that was my planned last day of work. Like, I wanted to have a week, to myself before baby potentially got there, and it was that day that I just started feeling really different. And I was working with a mom who was 6 weeks postpartum in a back little room of this PT clinic, and she just looked at me and was like, "Girl, you need to go home. I think you're going to have a baby soon." And I call her the fairy godmother of my birth, because if I had not listened to her, I would have not gone home early on my last day of work. I'm just like that very like stubborn mindset. Um, and I did. I lived about a quarter mile from home. And so I walked home,
Of course.
and um, um, my husband at the time was getting ready for a meeting, and he was like, "Should I still go to my meeting?" And I was like, "No, please go get the birth kit supplies." And so he ended up being at Walmart for several hours, getting the birth kit supplies. And I called my midwife and was just like, look, I'm having really, really strong contractions. I was still in denial about it. I was just, thinking Braxton Hicks, I was thinking first baby, it probably will be after 40 weeks. I hadn't been tracking for an early delivery. Baby wasn't
Mhm.
big, nothing like that. Um, and so my midwife lived about 45 minutes away. She was like, okay, we'll go in the birth kit that I gave you and just check your amniotic fluid and let me know. And it was like, okay, yep, I do have some amniotic fluid leakage. So she's like, okay, I'll be there soon. Um, and that was after I'd been home about an hour and a half. And so I was just in my tiny little bathroom over the commode in labor and actually gave birth before my midwife got there. So
Ah,
she,
okay.
yeah. And
You were completely alone.
I was, yeah. Yep. Um, which honestly for me it felt good. Like I'd read Ina
Okay.
May Gaskin's books and it felt very peaceful. Like I tend to be a more shy person by nature. And even though I had complete trust in my midwife, I liked the ability to just really tap into my own body. And when people ask me what to describe what that felt like, um, it- you can't concentrate on any one thing per se. I did have a mantra of just breathe baby down. And then physically, I correlate it to the sensation of throwing up, but just throwing down. Um,
Mm.
it wasn't painful to me, which I know it can be, and that's just, everyone has different experiences, and that's fine. But the only time I felt pain was the ring of fire, the 5-second ring of fire. Um, but then it was over quickly, and I um, grabbed baby, held him to me, and walked over to my bed and just laid down, waited for the midwife to get there. She got there about 30 minutes after I delivered. And I was just like, whoo, kind of in shock, and
Yeah.
just held baby to my chest, kind of a little shaky. Um, I had, a very precipitous labor. But it was only really about 3 hours from the time I felt some strong contractions. And I just kept patting baby skin to skin. I was like, baby's breathing. I'm breathing, skin to skin. I'll just wait for my midwife to get here. And, I had been told by my midwife and my OB a total of 6 times with ultrasound to expect a girl. Um, and I ended up, when the midwife got there, she was like, oh my gosh, you have a beautiful baby boy. And I had been saying, welcome to the world, baby girl, for 45 minutes. Like, I thought I had a girl on my chest. I did not check gender when my son was born.
Wow.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And so, I hadn't thought of a boy's name, hadn't, I had a friend that gave me 5 totes of girls' clothes from 0 months to age 5. Like we were set on clothes. And then yeah, out came a boy, and it was never like, oh, baby's in a funny position, it's hard to tell. So here I was, like, in my house, just gave birth and to a boy. um
That
yeah.
can be really, really hard. It's one of the reasons I didn't want to get ultrasounds and find out the gender when I was pregnant, because I
Mhm.
thought, in the chance that they're wrong, and they are, I knew that women felt like they mourned the baby that they lost, the girl,
Sure.
right? You have the name, you have the clothes, you have everything, and switching gears can be really hard. It can, I just didn't even want the chance, so I didn't want to find out.
Yeah, for me, it's a 50-50 chance, who knows,
Yeah.
but earlier on, I'd had the feeling that it was a boy, and then when I had the ultrasound that said it was a girl for the first time, I kind of that caused me to doubt my
Mm,
maternal instincts, actually. Like, "Oh, wow, I just had this really, really strong feeling it was a boy, and then here okay." So, it was revalidating, actually, in a
got
weird
it.
way of just like, "Okay, whew, alright, here we go. We got this?"
So there you are with a boy. She's
Mhm.
checking everything.
Yeah.
When does your husband finally show up?
Oh, gosh, it was After I had delivered the placenta,
Okay.
so I'm gonna say, yeah, about an hour after I delivered and
Okay.
maybe 15, 20 minutes after, midwife got there.
Okay, so she gets there, checks baby, checks you,
Mhm.
delivers placenta, everything's fine. Surprise.
Yeah.
You're not finishing your last day of work.
Right, right.
We're still there, like, oh, the fact that you wanted to work up to 39 weeks and have a week off was awesome, that mentality. Most people are like 37, so any day now, and, the next 5 weeks is a nightmare. So you had a good
Mhm.
mentality, and there were no issues, everything was fine.
Thankfully, yeah, yeah, and for me, this was something I didn't expect, so I like to talk about it, is for me, delivering the placenta was far more uncomfortable than delivering the baby, um,
Okay.
because for me, like, I felt like, the baby does all the twists and turns to kind of help themselves through, but the placenta just sits there, like, my uterus had to contract, it felt like twice as hard to get the placenta through than it did the baby.
Mm.
Um, so that was an interesting sensation to have, like, the relief of baby there, healthy, I was healthy, or what no hemorrhaging or anything like that, but then to kind of, like, re-gear up for this second delivery, was not something that I don't think was quite mentally prepared for, just because I hadn't heard it expressed that way before.
That's true, it's not expressed that way,
Mhm.
and it is the second delivery, and you don't I think most women are so focused on the baby that's on them, and also it's a different situation than like, you were by yourself in the bathroom, delivered the baby, the whole thing was a shock, right? And you're sitting there
Mhm.
and you're relieved, but also waiting to have everything checked to make sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I've seen from a doula and in my own births, there's so much focus on this baby you just had. And then in my experience, a midwife's like, okay, I'm going to need you to push again to get the placenta out. And it's never discussed. It is absolutely a second delivery. I feel like the
mhm,
euphoria kind of supersedes the discomfort.
sure,
You were a different situation and you were very, very present in that and you had more time. So, we should talk about the fact that it is a second delivery, and
mhm,
it is women forget that that's gonna happen. Like, what happened? It
yeah.
just falls out because it doesn't.
Right, right, yeah,
Yeah.
and I'd read a lot about the history around the placenta and how to treat it, you can treat it from a sacred perspective or just, more to the sidelines, and where I fell on that scale was, I didn't want the emphasis to be on the placenta during birth, I wanted it to be on my baby, and so I didn't end up, saving a piece of it or anything like that, which felt good for me, but it was just the shock of the delivery of that was hard, and I
Yeah,
was very thankful that my midwife was there for that part.
yeah, because you're right.
Mhm.
That's such an interesting perspective. It's usually kind of dismissed. It's the afterthought of the
Right.
main event. Yeah. So I'm
Mhm.
glad that you mentioned that because for some women that may definitely be the case. Um, Now your husband is there. I don't know. He's not your husband anymore.
Um, I've been trying to get a divorce for 3.5 years, and so it's not quite final yet, but
Okay.
we've been separated for 3.5 years, and,
How old was your son when you guys separated?
um, let's see, he was 11 months old.
Okay. So, I just knew that that relationship was not over anymore. Was there support there? He got there an hour later. Was there shock? Was there surprise? Kinda tell me about integrating to becoming a new mom now.
Yeah, yeah, You know, the thing was he had always expressed wanting to be a dad. He went to a boarding school growing up and was very removed from his primary family from age 6 onward, and so I think for him, the way he expressed it was he wanted to be a dad, he wanted to kind of, like, relive the childhood experience and, use that as a turning point in his life, but it didn't actually pan out that way. So, he was really invested about the first month, and then, for 2 months throughout that first 11 months that we were still together. He actually had to go to India for a full month time each time. So he was gone about 2 months. And so, he was invested that first month, and then he would say things like, "I'm throwing you into the ocean on purpose." And I would be punished if I struggled with breastfeeding. At one point I had mastitis, and he, looked at me as a failure because of that. And, I was determined to keep feeding my baby the best I could. And baby was gaining weight. He was healthy. He was fine. But breastfeeding was hard for me. The first, those first 2 months were real, real hard. And so, yeah, I think from a relationship standpoint, I'm a very empathetic, trusting, optimistic person. And I was kind of heartbroken to see those hopes not being really fulfilled, and to see this become another tool of a way for him to frame me as a failure.
Yeah.
And when I was doing everything I could, pouring my heart, soul around the clock, very independently into our child.
Right. I'm respectful for the fact that it was a tough situation and it's not over. So your practice after this, your business though, you had been doing this and you're a new mom. And so you're realizing the often harsh reality of it's not as easy. It's not a Pinterest board.
Right,
Being a
right.
mom. So you're living it yourself, and at what point did you go back to work? How did that change your practice? How did you, move into being a single mom, working a business with this baby? And I think we all have a hard time feeling like we're not failing on every front, We're not.
Sure.
So take me through that, because now, I mean, I know your son is 4, but you've really dedicated. Your information is on my website to refer moms because you work virtually. So I want to
Mhm.
preface this question by saying that, because at some point you felt the pain of being a mom and being a single mom and
Yeah.
a business owner and someone who works. So take me through that process and how you integrate it, because your program's amazing.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, I knew that after having a child, I didn't want to go back to clinic work full time. And so while I was pregnant, I had also kind of been cultivating my own business model. And so I did the Train for Birth model on myself, where I trained myself for birth, doing the program that I then piloted with 56 women before starting the Train for Birth program. So,
Awesome.
I did the research. It was based on the 2019 prenatal exercise guidelines, as well as the American Physical Therapy of Obstetric guidelines and ACOG. Those are my 3 main resources. And then there's, a ton of other articles I pulled into it as well. But essentially, I trained for birth myself, but I knew that I couldn't use just one person, my own experience as to launch a full-fledged business in this. And so then, I piloted the 56 moms. They were, sometimes first-time moms. There were pregnant women with twins. There
Mhm.
was a fourth-time mom. There's the whole spectrum of women. And I did all that for free for a whole year, while I just saw other orthopedic cases and, treated people in home. I would oftentimes bring my son with me. And thankfully, I had patients that were very understanding and respectful of that. Just I had to, out of necessity. And, you know, I, anytime there was a moment where my son was sleeping, I was trying to work on my business.
Mhm.
And I noticed for me, I'm not a strong suit in marketing. That's hard for me to market myself. And so that was always on the back burner. Like I was always doing patient care and notes and scheduling. Like those were my 3 business things. And marketing was what was always on the back burner. And so what I ended up doing was kind of a hybrid model for myself, is where I now work at a local doctor's office and see patients there. So the doctor does the referrals for my inpatient,
Oh, okay.
one-on-one care. So I don't have to worry about that side of it. And that gives me somewhat of a steady income stream. And then that also frees me up time to invest in my Train for Birth business. So with that, it's a virtual program where I train expecting parents throughout their pregnancy, or if they're even thinking about getting pregnant. Like, how do you activate your deep core? How do you protect the pelvic floor so that your chances of incontinence and prolapse are less? The number one reason why women get put in nursing homes down the road is because of incontinence, and that's largely preventable. And so I'm looking at kind of how do we protect the family model, the female body, the female person from a preventative standpoint. And, I know that making appointments in clinic isn't very feasible a lot of the times. And so, if I can help log on via Zoom with a mom, help her through just 5 minutes of hip
Yeah,
opening, that's great. And I like to be a resource for women for as long as they need. For months, people can email me, they can text me with questions, and that way they're not feeling like they're taking someone's time, or they have to make a hefty appointment and rearrange their whole schedule, because I know that's what I needed when I
yeah.
was postpartum. I needed that service. I couldn't afford. I left our abusive situation with no home, no car, and $5,000 to my name. Like that. I was in a pretty precarious situation, and thankfully, have had abundant family and friend support through this time. But I mean, I also, really wanted to make sure my own pelvic floor was okay, and wanted to
Right.
see a pelvic floor physical therapist. And, it helps to have sounding boards. And, I love working with moms from every range of experience, from a movement perspective, from a social perspective. you know, Even if you've never done intentional movement in your life, like, it's not too late. You can still do a few little things, or even if I can help guide people on a couple things not to do that could add
Mhm.
extra intra-abdominal pressure. Hey, that makes a difference. And I really, really set up Train for Birth to be accessible as possible and affordable as possible, because I know very realistically myself that struggle when you don't have health insurance and you're
Right.
trying to take care of yourself. And if you look long term, the cost of pads and extra tampons for leakage and you know, other surgical interventions, and down the road, like I said, long-term care facilities, like investing in something like this. Research says that even just one interaction with a pelvic floor physical therapist can reduce or eliminate any pelvic floor symptoms by 76%. So it's a lot of just
Wow.
body awareness can make such a big difference.
I don't love that you've had the struggle that you've had, but I love the fact that you took that struggle and your education and married them into something that helps other women. That is a very beautiful thing. Thank you so much for being on and sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's really empowering, to be able to share it in a way that I hope encourages others to be entrepreneurs, to
Mm.
find, to meet needs of each other. Like, we're here to take care of each other.